Welcome to your next MakerLibre build video. Now we're going to be assembling the Airtripper extruder. So what you're going to need, of course, is your motor. You're going to need your last gear, the last small bearing, the last large bearing, your push fit, four of the M3 washers, 2 of the M4 washers, these 4 plastic pieces, which are the Airtripper body. And when I'm mounting this, you have a big circle here and a small circle there. The filament will run from here up through here. Push fit is mounted there to the printer. Okay, so I'm going to refer to this in this orientation. So upper right corner, upper left corner, lower left corner, lower right corner. This is the strut, axle, and idler. You're going to have 2 springs. You're going to have 2 50mm M3 screws. You're going to have a 10mm M3 screw, 25mm, and 2 30mm screws. As well, you're going to need 2 M3 nuts, 1, 2. And these are going to be part of the tension springs. Okay, so the very first thing that you need to do is to prep the motor. You'll take this gear. You'll notice that there's a flat on the motor spindle, so you'll need to loosen up the set screw that's inside of it. And then you will install the gear so the flat is right under the set screw, and tighten it down, but don't crank it down yet because we're going to adjust it here in a couple of minutes. The next thing you want to do is take this small bearing, but this small bearing is an optional piece, but it just slides on to the end here. Okay, now you're ready to take this motor assembly and add it to the Airtripper body. So you take the Airtripper body, and what I like to do is have the cables from my motor go in the same direction as my filament. So the cables will go down, and you take the 10mm M3 screw and put it into the upper right hand corner and tighten it in. Okay, now at this point you can adjust your filament, your gear, to match where the filament's going to go through. So if you take a small Allen wrench and poke it through the bottom of the Airtripper extruder, you can see the path of the filament. So just adjust your gear so that it rests in the path of the filament. Spin the gear if you need to loosen up that set screw. And you want to align it. And now you tighten it down pretty tight. Okay, this bearing is actually meant to go right here onto the top of the Airtripper, and that just provides a little bit of stability so that this spindle doesn't wiggle. So it's an optional part, but I think it's a good part to have in place. The next thing that we're going to do is take the 25mm screw, and we're going to put it into the upper right of the Airtripper. And we're going to tighten this screw down. Alright, now we can take one of the 30mm screws, add a washer to the end of it, and we're going to poke it through the strut and give it a couple of turns until it comes through, and then we're going to pop the strut into this hole, and then we're going to tighten it all the way through until the screw goes into the motor. Now the purpose of this extruder is to drive the filament with the motor from the spool through the hot end. And it does that by turning this gear that has teeth on it while the filament itself is pressed up against it. So there's a trick to that, and the trick is that if you have the filament pressed too tightly, it's actually going to go out of round. Take the next screw, put a washer on it, and we're going to do the same thing. Now there's a gap here, and that's supposed to be there, and I'll show you why in just a minute. But anyway, if you have it tightened too tightly, that will actually cause the filament itself to get smushed, and instead of being round, it'll be oval shaped, and that'll cause a jam, especially in one of these Kossels, which has the Bowden type extruder. It has a tube running from here to the hot end. That tube is round in the middle, so if you take football shaped filament and you try to push it through the tube, where it's longer, it's going to rub up against the tube, and you're going to start to have a little bit of a problem. And then a novice, like I did when I first started printing, would think, hey, the reason my filament is skipping is because it's not tight enough. So you tighten it more, and you tighten it more, and you tighten it more, and what winds up happening is you make the problem worse and worse and worse, and then you blame the filament. When you get in that situation, what you really want to do is you got to pull out the filament, cut it off, and so that it's back in the round, and then not crank it down so much, okay? Because all that you need, if the filament is round, is enough tension to push your filament through the tube. Okay, so now our body is assembled. The last thing that we want to do is attach the push fit. Now this has been pre-tapped for you. This is an M5 tap, just like at the top of the effector. So we'll put this in, and we can turn it by hand. If it doesn't grab, you can grab a little bit of glue and dab the sides, but don't tighten it down too much. You only need it a little bit. Okay, you got a little window in here that you can look. Now this wasn't originally meant to have a push fit, this version of the Airtripper, but I added one to it because what I found is that when I use this version of the Airtripper called the BSP, I get a little bit more grip for my push fits, and it just seems to work a little bit better. Okay, so now we're ready to work on building the idler. Okay, so we need the idler, we need the axle, and we need this bearing. So back in the old days when people were doing rep wraps, they would have to get little, they didn't think about printing these, so you would actually buy these little pieces of rod that were metal, and you install those. And it was funny because you had people who were building 3D printers, and this piece is perfectly acceptable to 3D print, but people weren't using those. Now, this is where it goes. You're actually going to push it in so that the bearing goes in here and the axle goes in there. But this is sometimes a little bit tricky to get in here, so you have to clean this out. And you just want to create a path. Take all this, because I like to, my first layer, I lay it down pretty thickly. And I mean, sometimes this first layer has a little bit of overhang, a little bit gunk you got to clean out. That's okay. Okay? Because it's important that you're getting a good stick. Alright. So I push this through with my fingers as much as I can, and then I can use a pair of pliers to get it in the rest of the way. And there we go. Pops right in. Okay? Now, this idler, the whole purpose of this is to keep the filament up against those gear teeth. And so this hook will actually go in that open spot that we had earlier. And if you get into the situation here that we've got with the cap screw missing, you should also have a button head cap screw that you can put in the place. So we'll reach into our tool bag of parts, and we should be able to find our button head screw. And you can take the button head screw out, or you can take the socket head cap screw out, and you can put the button head screw in its place and tighten it down, and that'll do the same job. Now, when you've done that, the next thing that you want to do is to be able to add tension here. Okay? So that's where these things come in. You should have 2 springs. Okay, you want to take these washers, put them on the end here. Okay. Now the other thing that you want to do is you don't actually need the idler. The idler comes off. You want to take your screws and put them through these holes that are in the top. Just put them through here. And then you want to tighten the screws down just enough. You want to get the screws started. Do the same thing over here. Alright, and now we have the fully assembled extruder. I'm going to make one last look for my button head cap screw. So I'll take the socket head cap screw out. I can put the button head cap screw in. Now I can take my idler, and the way that you'll load filament is you'll push the filament through the bottom, through the gear, into the top, and then you get the hang of this. Pull the springs back and drop them into these little areas. And if you don't have enough grab with the washers on the end, if they slip up like this, then you can take these M4 washers and you can add a little bit of grip. back through the hole. Just get it started. And then we try this again. And it's going to be very rarely that you need to do more than just tighten this finger tight. And if you do need to tighten it more than that, it won't be by much. Now you have a fully assembled Airtripper extruder. Now you can attach this onto your printer in a few different places. If you have the Evil Scientist version or the professional version, I actually install it on one of the long parts of the extrusion, the part of the frame in the back, so that it sits up and down like this. But you can't do that if you have the Explorer version with the printed rails. And so what you'll want to do is install it onto the top of the frame like this or like this, so that the filament is actually going sideways. And you can install that yourself. That's a preference kind of a thing. The last thing that you want to do is, this is the PTFE tubing. Now you've got 1.5 meters, and you can cut that down if you need to. But that goes in here. But usually what I do before I install it, because we're going to be threading filament in here, is I take my needle nose pliers, I put it into the end of one of these, and I just turn it around. And that's to create a little bit of a wedge shape. And then I push this in. And then there we go. The other end goes into the effector, of course. Now, sometimes I install these little carriage pins just to keep this end up, but the truth is you don't need it. But if you wanted to get a pair of these at a local hardware store and install them, then that would be just fine. Now, once we attach this to our frame and plug this into the other push fit, mechanically our printer is done. So next we're going to move to electronics. Thanks.